Hi, folks. Today we're talking about Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and we'll begin with social history and demography and demographics. Asian Americans represent a great diversity of cultures, immigration periods, and backgrounds, yet disproportionately immigrated during the third and fourth waves of immigration to the United States. With the third wave, we're talking really from the period of 1880 through the early 19 teens, and then the fourth wave occurring from 1965 into the present. Initial Asian immigration to the U.S. occurred starting in the mid 1800s as Chinese nationals became mining, agricultural, and railroad laborers, mostly men intending to earn money to provide for family back in China. Significant growth of the Asian American population, particularly immigration from China, was met with anxiety and hostility with whites who feared being outcompeted for with respect to Chinese labor. This created a backlash that led to the passing of the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. In addition to barring immigration from China, the interpretation and enforcement of the act led to immigration bans from Asian countries broadly and anti miscegenation laws, which barred Asian Americans from marrying whites, citizenship, as well as owning property. Furthermore, Asian Americans were often barred from testifying in court. However, Japanese migration was a more nuanced experience with respect to kind of in contrast to that of the Chinese. Japanese migration to the United States began during the 1870s and 1880s, so again, parallel to the passing of the Chinese Exclusion Act. So we saw Japanese migrate to Hawaii and California, and with the backing of the Japanese government, which had negotiated with the US government to secure their well being, the Japanese who immigrated here were able to immigrate as intact families earlier than that of the Chinese. The War Brides Act of 1945, an exception to prior restrictions on Asian immigrants, permitted U.S. soldiers to marry and bring wives to the United States from Asian countries. A greater range of cultural and ethnic diversity of Asian immigrants occurred during the fourth wave, as greater percentages of South Asians, if you will, and Asian Indians immigrated. Additional push factors among this wave of immigrants included those of political war refugee status, particularly the Vietnamese, and going on, fourth wave immigration significantly increased the Asian American population in the United States, permitting marriages and partnerships amongst Asian Americans more so than in the past. Today, the greatest concentration of Asian Americans is on the West Coast, where more than 20% of the U.S. Asian American population resides. Going on, in terms of Pacific Islanders, comprised of several cultural and ethnic groups, about 1.4 million U.S. citizens are Pacific Islanders, including residents of Guam, Native Hawaii, and Samoans, and have more in common with Native Americans given similarities in their colonization histories. In terms of intergroup relations throughout American history, the Asian American and Pacific Islander population has had some varying and contrasting relationships to the dominant white society and government. So, with respect to this range of intergroup relations, we're looking really largely at annexation, internal colonialism, expulsion, and segregation. In terms of annexation, this was experienced by Pacific Islanders, particularly those in Guam, Hawaii, and Samoa, as these territories were appropriated by the U.S. government. In terms of internal colonialism, this characterizes the exploitation experiences with respect to economics and violence directed at Asian Americans immediately after the passage of the Chinese Exclusion Act during the late 1800s. Expulsion refers really to the World War II era Asian American concentration camps, largely set up on the West Coast, and segregation experiences involve separate schools for the Japanese during the early 1900s in Central and Northern California. In terms of sociological variables, gender, class, and inequality, for instance, traditionally social justice efforts for Asian Americans were framed to really prioritize race and racial solidarity in ways that de emphasize gender, class, and ethnic national differences amongst the race. Initial Asian American women's experiences in the United States were framed in dragon lady stereotypes, suggesting Asian women were cruel, inhumane, and predatory. These same stereotypes were used to great effect to exploit Asian women as they entered the United States. Significant social class inequality exists amongst the Asian American and Pacific Islander population in a manner similar, if you will, to that of African Americans. Although the Asian American population and Pacific Islander population has the highest college attainment rate, highest rates of advanced degrees, and highest household incomes, South Asians, so here we're looking largely at Cambodians, Laotians, and the Vietnamese, have much lower on average educational attainment than Asian American and Pacific Islander folks in general. Also, similar to other BIPOC groups, the financial return on years of schooling is significantly less for Asian Americans than it is for whites. Moreover, when controlling for relevant variables, Asian Americans still earn less money than similarly qualified whites. Lastly, Asian American Pacific Islander folks are vastly underrepresented in corporate and government leadership throughout the United States. On average, Asian households have more workers per household, work longer hours, and work in less prestigious fields and positions than that of white households. Asian Americans are much more likely to be self-employed than whites owing to labor market discrimination, cultural and ethnic resources, niches, as well as class resources. In another way of looking at diversity, South Asian populations have the highest high school dropout rates in the country. And going on, Asian Americans are steered and often tracked into professional and technical jobs, which are pre-identified for them in ways that DEI and HR positions related to DEI have been pre-identified for blacks, leaving them less likely to experience promotion because they're not in a mainstream part of corporate organizations. All right, in terms of institutions, while Asian Americans have high rates of intermarriage, marrying outside the race, most married Asian Americans are immigrants and are more likely to get married in their home country before immigrating to the United States. In terms of religion, research demonstrates that religious institutions provide practical and status benefits to the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, as well as the ability to freely and safely socialize with those of similar backgrounds. So this is something that contributes to group solidarity within Asian American communities and cultures. While Asian Americans claim no religious affiliation at the highest levels, the second largest concentration of religious groupings amongst Asian American and Pacific Islander folks includes those of Eastern religions, followed by Catholicism. In terms of sexual orientation, the data indicate that the LGBTQ community, with respect to Asian American and Pacific Islander teens, they are much more likely to be isolated due to the model minority myth and overt racism directed at Asian Americans. Generally, mainstream society is likely to initially see the LGBTQ community as a white community, thus ignoring Asian American and Pacific Islander populations in the LGBTQ community. Concerns of losing face or bringing shame to one's family, those concerns may restrict Asian American youth from openly discussing their sexual orientation or their gender identity.